Welcome back. You are live with Expresso. Thank you so much for tuning in on the eve of 21 days of lockdown. So on Monday, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced a 3-week lockdown of South Africa to tackle the spread of the new coronavirus. As of yesterday, South Africa's coronavirus cases had jumped again, now the number totaling 709, and it will continue to climb if we don't adhere to the new measures put into place during the 21-day lockdown. Here to tell us a bit more about the national lockdown and to answer some of your questions, please welcome Interim Federal Leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen. John, welcome during these crazy times. For someone who is working on the front lines and has to implement a lot of what now needs to be put into place during these 21 days, I would imagine a particularly fraught time, but an opportunity for us to work together as one, because we are now, not just as a nation, but globally pushing in one direction. Maybe you can start at the beginning. What does this lockdown mean for South Africa, and what is the ultimate purpose of it, to flatten the curve?
Yeah. Well, obviously what you want to do is to prevent a critical peak of infections taking place, because what that leads to is a run on your healthcare facilities, and they are not simply not going to be able to cope with huge amounts of sick people. So what you want to do is to flatten the curve, to limit the transmission to other people, to buy you time to be able to put in place emergency measures, to wait for some form of vaccine to emerge, but to most of all prevent that rush on the hospital facilities. If you have thousands of people rushing to facilities, there's a shortage of ventilators, a shortage of medical personnel, you really have a crisis on your hands. So this is really a tough time, and it really is massively inconvenient, and it comes at a huge cost for our economy. But it's absolutely essential to flatten the curve and to stop the spread.
We have the advantage, and I think this is where the presidency and all structures below, whether at a national or provincial level, need to be lauded for the tone, if nothing else, that we've approached this with. But we are able to follow global models that have worked. We have been able to see this. We have the one advantage of being able to follow those cases that have worked in other countries. I think a big question, maybe one of the first, is who is going to be allowed to leave their houses? So much has been said, but the man on the street doesn't quite know exactly where we stand. So who's allowed? Which employees will be allowed to leave their houses? Who's going to be able to roam freely, if anyone?
Well, the regulations were published yesterday by Minister Dlamini Zuma, and it's very, very clear from those who are going to be allowed out during this period, and that is mainly police personnel, frontline medical personnel who are required to assist with medical cases, emergency services, so your fire departments, your ambulance services, stores that will be able to remain open are mainly grocery stores, and food, to keep the food chain going so we don't have panic buying, and citizens will be allowed out to go and buy groceries, to access medical care, and to buy pharmaceutical products. So people will be allowed to them, but only under those circumstances.
We are already experiencing panic buying to some degrees in some communities. I mean, I applaud the people who have just approached us with some modicum of calm, but unfortunately panic has set in some places. When it comes to public transport, how is that going to be governed, and who will be able to use it, and how much of that infrastructure is going to remain?
Well, obviously what you want is to keep people away from public transport as much as possible. There's two weak points for South Africa. The communities where you've got large numbers of people living very, very close together who cannot self-isolate, and is a perfect environment for the virus to spread. And of course public transport, which is able to spread the virus both on the public transport and to transport it to other communities. So people should really try and avoid using public transport during this period. There are some regulations that have been put in place around the number of people in a vehicle, the sanitization requirements, as well as the way in which public transport nodes need to be sanitized. But really during this 21-day period, people should just try and stay at home as much as possible. We're not going to flatten the curve. We're not going to stop the spread if we have people moving around as per normal.
Maybe I can speak from a very privileged situation. I mean, everyone, I know it's all relative. I've got a baby coming next week, which kind of changes the game entirely for me, but it's almost been a blessing because it's given me something else to focus on. But a lot of people just asking about the simple things like, can I go for a jog? Will I be able to take my dog for a walk? Cabin fever's already set in and we haven't even taken it to level 10 yet. what are the basic things that I can do during this time?
Well, it's unfortunately a little bit confusing because we had two different messages. We had the health minister telling us one thing and Minister Cele telling the nation another thing about dog walking and jogging. So Minister Mkhize said that you can take your dog for a walk. He said you can go for a jog, but not too long and don't congregate. Minister Cele said nobody's allowed on the streets. So this also needs government to have one stream of communication, I believe, where you're getting one definitive set of answers for people. So my understanding from the regulations is that it is a lockdown and people should not leave their homes unless for the reasons set out, food, medical care, or emergency requirements. So we're hoping that today, during the course there'll be some definitive answer from government about what they can be. But people should really try and stay indoors.
And what's good for some has to be good for everyone, unfortunately. So while you might think you have the freedom to be able to roam and you live in a spacious area and others don't. And unfortunately, we need a blanket approach. We've had a myriad of comments come through and questions. Terry Ann Arndt is saying, I want to know what happens to parents who are divorced that have kids who need to visit their dads or moms. Will there be special consideration for something like that?
Well, of course, people need to make an arrangement. I don't think it's good for children to be moving between homes during this period. If we're going to flatten the curve and stop the spread, we need to stop the movement of people. And I think what parents, I happen to be the father of two children from a previous marriage, so I made an arrangement that the children during this period will stay with their mom. Once the 21-day period is over, they can come down to me, and if there's a further lockdown or further quarantine times, that they would obviously spend with me. But I think it's something that has to be negotiated with parents at this time, and they have to be responsible about how we manage the spread of the virus, particularly with young people who may not suffer from the symptoms, but can become carriers of the virus.
Yeah, no, I think I'm constantly struck by needing to keep my mom safe, but needing a resource where my boy can stay, and how do you manage those tricky waters? Saffron Fish is saying, good morning, everyone. My family and I are supposed to move into our new home on the 1st of April. Will this be allowed or only once lockdown is over? I'm assuming...
Yeah, that's off. It has to be complete lockdown. And again, you're going to come into contact with movers, with people that are moving furniture in and out of your... The moving companies are not going to be allowed to be out on the roads moving people. It's non-essential. And unfortunately, Saffron's going to have to delay the move.
You're going to have to wait, but you're not alone there, so at least people can empathise. Adele Erlang saying, hi, everyone. May employers apply the no work, no pay principle for people who are unable to work from home, i.e. salespeople? Yeah. This is murky waters.
Yeah. So government has developed an economic intervention package which seeks to provide financial assistance for businesses and employees who are suffering during this period. Obviously, I think we have to make an appeal to employers to be sympathetic during this period. This is really, salespeople are not being locked down because they don't want to go to work. It is a health imperative. And I think where employers can keep the payroll ticking over, they need to make that effort to do so. It is in the national interest that they do so. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of tricky labour law during this period because, as I said, this is not something that people can choose whether they go to work or not. It is a government edict. Maybe
I can ask you this, and maybe these are the questions you are asking as well, but where do we go to? Who do we ask?
Yeah.
Can I get to the hospital on this day? Who do I get that permission slip for? What is given as a permission slip? Who do I get communication from? Or do we have to wait for communication to come from the presidency and filter down?
Well, there's a number of websites that have been set up around the country. Government has its own website. We've got one as well for our political party where we're putting on information on a daily basis and absorbing the information that's coming from government and putting it into easy-to-read formats, infographics, etc. It's da.org.za/defeat coronavirus, defeat COVID-19, defeat COVID-19. And people can access that information there. But there are also government websites. The Western Cape Provincial Government's got a website. Most provincial governments have got websites to be able to access that information.
And we've got WhatsApp and emergency numbers on screen right now as well, but we'll try to relay as much of that information as possible. Stay tuned for a continued discussion on the national 21-day lockdown with John, of course, joining us from the DA, but it seems like all politicking has been set aside for human interest, and we'll continue on that path in just a moment.